welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into the anatomy of a truly bizarre, tragic, and honestly, largely forgotten industrial disaster from 19th century London. We're going to unpack exactly what went down on October 17, 1814. It's a crazy story about rapid industrialization, fluid dynamics, and a really stark divide between the wealthy and the working class.
So let's just get right into it. I want you to imagine the terrifying reality of a literal tsunami of beer. We're talking a 15-foot-high wave of dark liquid and heavy timber just crashing through city streets without any warning. Now, I know it sounds like a surreal myth, or maybe even a dark comedy sketch, but it was incredibly real and absolutely deadly for the people caught in its path.
To wrap your head around how this even happened, you really have to grasp the jaw-dropping scale of this operation. 571. That number represents the 571 imperial tons of fermenting porter stored inside one single massive wooden vat. The pure physical mass of the liquid inside this one container was just staggering, completely redefining what it meant to brew beer on a commercial scale back in the 1800s.
Section 1. The Brewing Arms Race.
You really can't separate this disaster from the rapid capitalization of the British brewing trade at the time, driven by aggressively ambitious brewers like Henry Mewkes, who took over the Horseshoe Brewery right at the junction of Tottenham Court Road and Oxford Street. Production just skyrocketed. By 1811, his company was churning out an astonishing 103,502 barrels of porter a year. Porter was absolutely the undisputed drink of choice for London's rapidly expanding working class. So to optimize production and basically prove he could brew bigger and better than anyone else, Mewkes and other major brewers got caught up in this crazy industrial arms race. Historians actually refer to it as vat megalomania. They weren't just building storage containers, they were building giant monuments to their own commercial status.
The crucial thing to understand here is how these colossal vessels were actually put together. They were maturation vessels, which meant they had to hold porter undisturbed for up to a year to develop its stable flavor. To pull this off, they built vats standing 22 feet high out of heavy oak staves. But here is the fatal flaw, the real ticking time bomb. Their structural integrity relied entirely on external iron hoops. We're talking up to 80 long tons of iron just wrapped around the wood. They were holding back an absolute ocean of liquid with nothing but external iron bands.
Section 2. The Physics of Failure.
Now, people often assume the vat exploded because of fermentation gases building up, right? But the porter inside was already 10 months old. The primary fermentation had long stopped, and any remaining gas easily just vented right out the top. Instead, the vat was destroyed by hydrostatic pressure. If you're not familiar, hydrostatic pressure is the continuous outward mechanical force exerted by a fluid at rest and is calculated by its density, gravity, and height. So basically, there was a constant, massive outward pressure of 65.4 kilopascals pressing against the bottom oak staves. The failure was entirely mechanical. It was just pure structural fatigue. Let's walk through the exact step-by-step breakdown of how this catastrophic failure played out. At 4:30 p.m., a clerk named George Crick noticed the lightest of the 22 iron hoops had slipped off the vat. Keep in mind, this lightest hoop weighed 700 pounds. Because this happened occasionally, his supervisor brushed it off, told him no harm would come of it, and just to write a letter to get it fixed later. But with that hoop gone, that massive 65.4 kilopascals of hydrostatic pressure instantly redistributed to the remaining hoops, which were already pretty corroded. The rivets slipped, and the massive wooden staves just burst outward. Section 3. The wave hits St. Giles.
Things escalated terrifyingly fast. After that warning sign was ignored at 4:30 p.m., the compromised vat violently ruptured at 5:30 p.m. Crick was standing just 30 feet away when it happened. The hydraulic shockwave was so powerful it knocked the stopcock out of another vat below and completely smashed surrounding barrels. Over 1 million liters of hot fermenting porter demolished a 25-foot-high brick wall and just surged straight into the streets. By 6:30 p.m., rescuers were pulling a 4-year-old girl named Hannah Banfield's body from the rubble. By 8:10 p.m., they found Eleanor Cooper, a 14-year-old servant who had just been washing pots in a local pub yard, crushed beneath the collapsing brewery wall.
And this brings up a really grim historical irony. 60 years earlier, the famous artist William Hogarth produced his prints Gin Lane and Beer Street. He explicitly set Gin Lane in this exact neighborhood, St. Giles, depicting the residents as morally bankrupt and destroyed by gin. Meanwhile, Beer Street championed beer as this healthy, temperate, industrious alternative. Yet, in reality, it wasn't the ruin of gin that brought sudden death and devastation to these residents. It was a deadly tidal wave of the exact beverage
Hogarth was moralizing about.
Section 4. Victims of the Rookery. To truly understand the human cost here, we have to look at the St. Giles Rookery. This was an impoverished, densely packed slum located directly behind the brewery. What is absolutely heartbreaking about the victims is their demographic reality. Because it was 5:30 p.m. on a Monday, the adult men were mostly away working as laborers or porters. So the people trapped at home were vulnerable women and young children. Every single one of the 8 people who died instantly in the flood fit this exact profile, from a 3-year-old toddler to a 60-year-old woman.
The actual geography of the Rookery made it a total death trap. It was extremely flat and low-lying, with basically no effective drainage. The impoverished residents lived down in subdivided basement cellars, which lay directly in the path of the wave and filled up instantly. Residents were literally forced to climb onto their furniture just to escape drowning. In one particularly horrific scene, a group of Irish immigrants was holding a wake in their cellar for a 2-year-old boy who had died the day before. The room flooded, drowning 5 mourners, including the grieving mother. When rescuers finally waded in, they found her body floating among the debris alongside an illegal gin still. It's just a stark, tragic reminder of the informal survival economy going on in that slum.
Section 5. The Unfair Aftermath. The official verdict from the coroner's inquest was honestly stunning. Because they found the vat's foundations were sound and the venting hatch was clear, the jury ruled it was an unpredictable mechanical failure. They deemed the disaster an act of God, stating the victims died by casualty, accidentally, and by misfortune. And just like that, this verdict completely cleared Henry Muse and Company of all legal liability.
This socioeconomic disparity following the disaster really tells you everything you need to know about the era. The impoverished human victims from St. Giles received absolutely zero compensation from the brewery. They had to rely on a public collection at a local pub, where neighbors literally placed pennies on the coffins just to help the families afford basic burials. Meanwhile, the wealthy brewery was facing bankruptcy from all the lost product. So what did they do? They successfully petitioned Parliament and were granted a massive $7,250 tax refund for the excise duties they had paid on the spilled beer. So the government completely bailed out the corporation, while the victims and their families got absolutely nothing.
From a technological standpoint, though, the legacy of the flood was pretty undeniable. It proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that massive, unlined wooden containers held together by external iron hoops were fundamentally unsafe for storing enormous volumes of liquid under such high hydrostatic pressure. The global brewing industry eventually abandoned these vats entirely, transitioning first to lined concrete and eventually to the sanitary, high-strength stainless steel fermentation tanks we use today.
Which leaves us with this final provocative thought. The Great London Beer Flood is so often treated as this quirky historical footnote, a weird trivia question to bring up at a party. But when you really look at the evidence, it's a story about accountability, class disparity, and the dark side of rapid industrial progress. It really leaves you wondering, when you look at the true value of a human life versus corporate protection, has that balance truly shifted since 1814? Thanks so much for joining me on this Explainer.